Good morning. My name is Memo Ngui from Industrial Psychology Consultants, and we are very excited to bring you this particular presentation by Clive Davies, direct from Australia. Clive is not new to Africa. He has done a lot of work in Africa on productivity. He will give you a short brief about himself before we start. But for those that know this particular, how we have been doing work in Zim, I'm sure you know my passion on the issues to do with productivity. And I expect that you will enjoy this particular presentation by Clive.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And good morning to everybody in the audience. And thank you to Memory Ngui of IPC for this invitation to present the webinar today. You will have read my bio and already know a little bit about my. Just briefly, the name is Clive Workman Davies. I was born in Bulawayo at the Lady Rodwell in 1943. I grew up in South Africa. I went to Wits University after getting a mining engineering degree, and then went back to Wits as part of my career to be one of the lecturers. And that's where I started to learn in detail about productivity and productivity accounting. And now I live in Australia, and here I am this morning doing this webinar. So the idea is to present some ideas about productivity, what it is, what factors influence it, how to enhance it, how to model it, and how to measure it and relate it to the bottom line being profit. So what I'll do is I'll show you what I call my stick man. And from this, we'll move on to understanding about a surplus that gets produced that can be exchanged for other goods and services. In the old days, it used to be by barter, but these days it's by money. Having discussed that, we'll look at some slides to get an understanding of block modeling. Because when one looks at that business, however easy, small or complicated the business is, if you do block modeling, you get a better understanding and you'll be able to achieve a clearer analysis and a better detailed measurement. And finally, towards the end, we'll move on to looking at a methodology that provides the true link between profit and productivity. Here we've got the basic stick man. The internet connection is unstable. Okay. First thing that we see about the stick man is that he's got muscles. This shows an ability to do physical work, but it doesn't guarantee the work being done. Next, we add in a brain, and this acts initially as the computer for the body to enable it to function physically. Now you'll see there's like a funnel at the top of the head, sort of feeding information into the brain. And the brain can then process that information. That information is coming from an external source. Now we have a heart being demonstrated, and this heart shows the ability to exhibit emotion. What we see now in the funnel is a light bulb. We all know about the light bulb moment, and that represents thinking. But it doesn't guarantee that we will think and that our thinking will be clear and sound. So we finally arrive at this individual here on an island, surrounded by the ocean and having a palm tree. What is he to do? He has choices to make. He can do nothing and die, or he can think and act to live. So this is rather dramatic to say something like that, but sometimes by keeping it simple, it demonstrates the fundamentals of what life is really all about. So what we learn from these slides is that a mental effort together with a physical effort is required in order to live. What that means is that you have to give in order to get. And we'll discuss this a little more later. So as an individual, you need to give your time, your mind, and muscles as inputs to get outputs. As a sole trader, if you have more outputs than you need for your own consumption, then you exchange the surplus for other goods and services, as in a barter situation, or more often these days for money. Money, of course, acting as an easy means of representing your output and expediting transactions between people. So here we illustrate a situation, photograph from Google showing an artist in Zimbabwe with a stall, and his inputs are canvases, paints, and brushes in order to produce the art. And now he's out there wanting to sell the art and achieve his revenue. So to cover his costs and to show a profit, which would be his surplus. Here's another photograph from Zimbabwe. Young lady doing the hair of another person in a informal setting, using a skill to be able to provide a service to somebody in need of that service. Now, in the older days, you might have had a farmer with surplus vegetables and needing some laundry to be done, and they would have bartered those vegetables, the surplus vegetables, for a service, a laundry service to be done. Also, if we stayed with farming, you might have had a farmer with surplus sheep and he needed some fruits or some vegetables, and he would trade and exchange on a fair basis, equitable basis, something that they could agree to as fair value so that they were each satisfied with the transaction. So that gives us the background to how we are as people. And we have an overview of that. Now we're moving on to the block modeling. And what I want to show with the block modeling is an animal farm. And here we are in this block. We've got the breeding stock, and then you get the juniors being born, and they move over into the herd or the flock. And then when those animals are mature, or when they're ready for slaughter, or they're ready for further purpose, they go out for sale. So the breeding stock could be pigs. I've seen that pigs is quite a new industry there in Zimbabwe. And then, of course, you've got your regular cattle industry. Now, you need various inputs into the breeding stock for it to be successful. And you need various inputs, as illustrated here, to go into the herd and the flock to sustain that flock. So what we've got a variety of inputs feeding into these various production blocks, and the output are animals for sale. The second block diagram modeling I'm going to show you relates to the Zimbabwe Power Company. And the data that I've got here on the slide, I've extracted from the ZPC website. So the Kariba South Bank produces 1,050 megawatts on a short-term basis, and possibly for an hour or two or three, depending upon the level of the water in the Kariba Dam. Then there's 4 other power stations: Wankie, Bulawayo, Munyati, and Harare. These are all coal-fired power stations, and the Wankie is the biggest one with a 920 megawatt baseload capacity. So between the 4 of the coal-fired power stations, the total baseload available is 1,100 megawatts. And this is far short of what Zimbabwe as a nation requires. But there's a lot of steps being taken to improve the situation. We've got an emergency peak loading power station being built near Mutare. Now, to enlarge on the diagram, we've got the various inputs that are feeding into the Wanky power station, the Bulawayo one, the Munyati one, and the Harare one. And they would be water, people, infrastructure, coal, and so forth. So by looking at a block model like this, you capture the whole business in one diagram, and then each one of these power stations can then be expanded in its own right. So that's what the next diagram is going to show. In a single power station, what you've got is a coal stockpile, the coal feeding into the boiler. The boiler generates steam. The steam goes into the turbine rotates the generator. The generator produces electric power. Electric power goes out for sale. Everything else here are inputs that have got to be paid for by the revenue earned by the electric power. Now, the other point that I want to discuss here is the mental aspects of productivity and the human aspects of productivity. So the Japanese Productivity Center put a very short, catchy phrase that productivity is an attitude of mind. Now, carrying on with that positive attitude of mind aspect, I was doing some research on the webinar and read something by Rodney Ndamba in Zimbabwe. And his quote is that productivity is determined by tangible final goods and services achieved from knowledge, skills, collaboration, shared values, and inspirations. And these are all mental attributes that determine the frame of mind of a person when they are at work. So contrast these positive mental attitudes with what we read on the next slide. So in 2013, there was a Gallup survey in the United States which revealed that 70% of United States workers are disengaged from their workday. And they put it down to the fact that those workers are distracted by smartphones, social media, personal emails, and the demands of their own personal lives that they don't leave at home, and that most workers then find it hard to focus consistently and to be productive. Then 2 years later, researcher Olin Blanchard did a study. And to quote from that study, they said the only factor in their study that could explain the stagnant level of productivity in the United States was a survey that revealed a loss of optimism in management and in the workforce. And this loss of optimism was like a demotivational factor, was what's the worth of trying? What's the point of trying? And sort of like, let's just sit back and take it easy. Now, to be useful, another study has been done in a neighboring country in 2018, looking at factors affecting labor productivity and rating them. So the 4 areas of factors that we looked at were classified as managerial, materials, human, and technical. And as we go through those in detail, you'll see that managerial is obviously the responsibility of the management. The materials are the responsibility of management. And the technical are the responsibility of management. And indeed, if you have a closer look at the human factors, there's also responsibility on management as far as those are concerned. So there's a lot on the shoulders of management to be responsible for and to assist with. So out of that study that was done in this neighboring country in 2018, these are how they ranked the management factors in terms of poor communication, lack of incentive programs, lack of coordination. Material factors: unavailability of material, inefficient equipment, tools and equipment shortages, late deliveries of material, or even lack of materials, unsuitability of plant and equipment, tools and equipment breakages, and unsuitability of material storage, and so therefore materials get damaged and are not useful afterwards. The human or labor factors, shortage of experience, working overtime, physical fatigue, all things to be addressed by management. Technical factors, complexity of projects is what the study showed. Poor organization, rework, poor site layout, and these other factors as well. So that leads us with a lot of things to consider. So how can we sort of resolve this? One way of looking at it is by considering that what you sow, you reap. And the best way of, one way of enlarging on this is to think of the big one and the little one. Now, to give some examples of what the big one is and the little one, we start off in the family, where you have the parent and the child. And then off to school, the teacher and the pupil. At school, and subsequently sports teams, you have a coach assisting a team. In a work situation, in mid-management, you've got supervisors dealing with workers, and then you've got the owner of the business also dealing with workers. So the question to ask is, what is the job of the big one? And have a think about that, and the answer is on this slide. So the job of the big one is to grow the little one. To do this, the big one has to give something I mentioned earlier on. This is very evident to a parent to his children. And so obviously this idea, this principle can be extended to the owner of the business. He has to give so that the workers can grow. Now, not every owner will see it that way at this point in time, but that is the best way for that owner to achieve their best outcomes, is to put their workers in a position where those workers can grow in skill, grow in ability, grow in opportunity, grow in motivation. So those words grow and give, I've put in quote marks, and this is to emphasize the positive application of those words. Going back to the family situation, the parent can give their children too much and the wrong things, so that those children grow up to be spoilt and lazy with no skills. And so the equivalent can be considered in a business situation. Now, this slide shows you back in the day with the technology at a point in time and the so-called square wheels. So not to this was the best technology they had back then. But we're fortunate we can look now at this and see, well, there's a whole lot of areas where improvements could be made to make it easier for that man and his dog to be able to pull that cart along that rough road. So that's the job of the big one, is to help work out these things to make it easier and provide the right means and tools and methods for the people doing the hands-on work. Now, another thing that I think is interesting is that this study that was made in 2014, they examined the labor distribution in the United States. And in the United States, 2% of the workforce is engaged in the primary industry. That is mining, forestry, fishing, and engineering. The secondary industries have 13% of the workforce. That is where the raw materials are processed for a sale in the marketplace. And then 67% were in the tertiary sector of the economy. And that is the service sector, that is the schooling sector, the health sector, the judicial sector, every other sector that you can imagine falls in there. Now, their economy is so sophisticated that they wanted to get more detail out of the tertiary sector, so they devised a quaternary or fourth industry and then a fifth industry. And so normally speaking, this 4% and 14% making 18% would be together with the 67% to represent 85%. 85%. Now, the situation in Zimbabwe, I wasn't able to establish what the labor force distribution is by industry, primary, secondary, and tertiary. But I would imagine, and you would know better, there would be more people involved in the primary and secondary sectors than in the tertiary sectors. But I'd be interested to get better information about that. So at the end of the day, we all want to have a slice of cake. And what we've got here is the cake is being cut up into equal slices. And we see people in an orderly fashion sort of each taking their slice. And that's a happy situation. However, contrast that with this situation where we've got another big cake and we've got so many people there with wanting to cut it up. And the point is, well, who decides to do the cutting up and how big to make the pieces? And should the pieces be shared equally, or should some get bigger pieces than others? So that's a big discussion in itself, but it illustrates the situation and the dilemma faced by management and supervisors. Now, another factor in the economy that's got to be considered that influences productivity efforts are trade unions and the role they play, whether favorable or negative. Now, because I was in the mining industry back in South Africa, I remember the time of the National Mine Workers Union, and here's Cyril Ramaphosa. He was one of the chief leaders of the NUM movement at that time, and in the boxing ring with the mine bosses of that era. And you've got various comments being made in this sort of cartoon diagram. But that's history now. We've moved forward, and but trade unions are still around. Trade unions are still standing up for the workers. And so what's the best way forward in negotiating with them and providing the union with facts that are indisputable? Now, I'm going to show you two slides regarding a union in Australia. And they took an aggressive campaign, they made an aggressive campaign against a particular mining company in Australia at a point in time. This particular union we see down here is the CFMEU union, the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Engineering Union. And they took issue with this particular mining company called Roche. And of course, we all know about the insect, the bug called a cockroach. And so that's why they've got this cartoon showing a cockroach and they're going to exterminate it. because they wanted decent wages, decent conditions, job security, and reasonable hours. And so that company had to deal with those things. Here's another humorous cartoon. This obviously wasn't a genuine Roche mining cartoon. It was something done by the CFMU because you've got this aggressive looking person who's saying low wages, long hours, insecurity, dodgy safety. That's what we can give you. All right, that brings us then to being able to look at productivity accounting. And here we've got a diagram that tries to capture various things. And what we're looking at is productivity improvement. But we're faced with external components in any business. And then within a business, we've got internal soft components and internal hard components. Now, the external components are something that the business can do nothing about. It's just something that they have to accept. They have to accept the terrain, the weather that's there, the national culture in which the business operates in, the legislation that is operating, the market conditions. They can't influence the prices of goods in the marketplace. The educational system that provides the education to the workforce. Then we've got infrastructure situation. So in Zimbabwe, you just have to accept that you don't have constant supply of electricity. You've got problems with the railway system. But these are all being addressed, but they make it difficult. And then, of course, we've got the state of the economy with foreign exchange and other concerns like that. Make it extremely difficult for any business in Zimbabwe to be successful. Now we come to within the business itself. They call soft components, but because these are human factor components, people components. We've already looked at a lot of those in the previous slides. So now we'll look at the internal hard components. That's the layout of the plant. That's the equipment. That is the training provided to the workforce. That's the area over which management's got control, and it's least difficult for them to change and make the biggest benefit gains. So any single business is operating in an environment where they need somebody to buy their output. And they need suppliers so that they can process the inputs to produce an output to sell to a buyer. Now, in order to start off a business, they have to have working capital. They have to have initial startup capital. And that will come from the shareholders. And the shareholders, in due course, will expect some return for the capital that they've loaned and invested into the company. And as the company runs its business, so it has to pay taxes to the central government. And then, does it look like at last the mining business or the business and such gets to pay its workers? They look like I should have maybe paid them first. But that's the problem. That's the dilemma. There's just so many people involved that it's all got to be balanced out. So getting an overview of what a business is all about. We have labor and materials, capital going into the black box for conversion to produce goods and services. And those goods and services must come out, should come out, are required to come out at a quality standard. Otherwise, they are rejects, they're not part of production, they don't meet standard. And those goods and services go into the economy and provide for the standard of living of the people that buy them. Now, this whole black box conversion process is monitored by productivity and price recovery. Productivity, we're somewhat acquainted with. Price recovery, maybe not, but that'll be clarified. So there's a journey. If we want to improve productivity, we need to go on a journey. We need to examine the business structure. That's the block modeling. Not in the coarse detail that I showed you, but in finer detail to that as we get into the nitty-gritty of it. Then productivity measurement becomes required. Then you can do some diagnosis or analysis and come up with a productivity plan. And the plan must have accountability. People must be made to achieve the productivity plan. Otherwise, the improvement won't be achieved. So what do we mean by inputs or resources? So raw materials, tons of steel, kilograms of flour if you're a baker, energy, kilowatts of electricity, or tons of coal, like in the case of Zimbabwe Power Station. Capital, how do you measure capital? In dollar amount, plant capacity in terms of the output of certain machinery, or do you measure it by the floor space? You measure all three. And manpower, how do you measure that? By numbers of people, by the hours together with the numbers of people. There are many things to be considered, but which one is best? That can only come out in the final analysis. And so what is the production quantity there? The output quantity. So sometimes in a clothing factory, it might be the number of shirts. Sometimes it could be liters of wine, or cubic meters of concrete, or tons of pulp. Or if it's a service, like a distribution service, tons of product hauled for so many kilometers. Or in a food service setting, the number of meals served. So product quantities can either be final or intermediate, and I'll try to explain that a little further. Now, traditional productivity measures, do they tell you the whole story? Like in a retail situation where you have dollar sales per square meter, is that the be all and end all of it? Or is that just a sort of a nice rule of thumb or guideline or a help in one way? In a sawmilling situation, does cubic meter sawn per man hour explain the whole business or just a part of that business? Likewise in a foundry or in a motor repair shop. Now these traditional measures, they do have some advantages. They're quick and easy, they're familiar with an industry, and they are the start of productivity measurement. But they do have disadvantages. They may be misleading, they are only partial measures, they are using unweighted quantities, and there are no financial impacts shown with them. So, productivity and prices. Intuitively, managers know that productivity and prices are important to the profitability of a business. Managers realize that productivity and prices impact on mining costs or business costs. Today, we want to look at a new way of analyzing business company data. Now, all of a sudden, here's a slide showing fruit salad. And that's the confusion that we have today with classical accounting, with standard costing and inflation costing. It's a fruit salad because dollars come from a quantity times a price. So when you talk about dollars and dollars and dollars, you are mixing up quantities with prices. What has to be done is to separate out the quantities in isolation and the prices in isolation. So they each tell their own story. If you only work with dollars, you will always have some confusion. inaccuracy. So revenue is reported in dollars, fair enough. But behind that is a production or output quantity sold in the marketplace at the selling price. That's the real facts. Likewise, cost initially can be reported in dollars, that's fine. But underneath that, we understand that there's an input quantity, something that was bought in at a certain price. And not to lose this information. So there are two ways of looking at something. Now, if you look at this diagram, many of you might have seen it, hopefully you have. You can see the old lady with one blink of the eye, and the other blink of the eye, you see the young lady. That's what we're looking at in today's business situation. The old lady is this way, just looking at the business in terms of we've had a change in revenue with respect to a change in cost between two business periods, and that's our change in profit. And what are we going to do about it? We need a new way of looking at it. We get that new way by expanding on the revenue and saying, well, yes, it's production quantity sold in the marketplace at a selling price. And cost is inputs, quantities bought at different cost prices. So now we've got an interesting diagram here with 2, 5, 7 boxes. But there's an open space here and another open space there, begging for boxes. And we say, well, yes, production quantity with respect to input quantity is the classical definition of productivity. We could put a box in here for that purpose. And if that's the case, maybe there's a relationship here that we can define for the box that would go here. If you've got the selling price with respect to cost price, that defines price recovery. That's what we end up with. Changing profit in the new way of considering things can be explained as a contribution coming from productivity dollars and price recovery dollars. And by doing this, you get a lot more information. And this is the new way. So let's just move on. We get partial productivity measurements. We get total productivity measurements, total factor productivity measurements, multi-factor productivity measurements. There's a couple of models out there. But to pick up on this contribution to dollars from productivity and price recovery, let's consider this table. The business made $10 million profit in a particular period. Now that can be explained in 5 different ways. Just looking at some simple arithmetic, productivity contributed $13 million, but there was price under recovery that decreased that by $3 million, the net being 10. On the other hand, another plausible scenario could have been all the $10 million profit came from productivity alone, nothing from price changes. Or the 10 million came equally from productivity and price recovery contributions. Or in fact, none of the 10 million came from productivity efforts and all of it came from price over recovery. Or in a bad situation, the 10 million was made up by a decline in productivity contribution compensated for by price over recovery. And this can be illustrated on a profit grid. And that illustrates just diagrammatically the 5 cases being mentioned. Now, surely it strikes you that it would be very important to understand which one of those 5 would better suit you. Just going back here, be in a much better situation to have all your profit coming from productivity, because then that means that you've got zero price recovery. In other words, your cost prices go up by, let's say, 5%. Your selling prices go up by 5%. They offset one another. That's zero price recovery. So all the contribution is coming from productivity improvements. And that's the strongest case to have. The weakest case, obviously, is when you've got zero coming from productivity and 10 million. Well, the weakest case is when you've got negative productivity dollars and all compensated for by price over recovery, where the price of what you're selling is for some reason is escalated very rapidly, like the gold price or the platinum price or whatever prices you might be thinking of. So we need to have some equations to help us with this. And just to, all based on the fact that value is equal to quantity times price. And then if you take the output on the top and the input below, you get the definition for productivity. And likewise for prices, you get the definition for price recovery. And if you tidy that up, you can put it in a diagram like this. And then further, you can come to this 9-box diagram where it shows the dollar contribution from productivity and the dollar contribution from price recovery. Now this is diagrammatic, but these are obviously notation, and the notation is put into equations, and the equations then calculate the actual numerical aspects of the dollars from productivity and from price recovery, and also so many other things. Now this can be just for the business, black box business, or it can be for each subsection of the business. It can be done for each line item in the accounts, or it can be done for subtotals in the accounts. However you want to process the data, the software behind it can do that, and it produces what are called expert reports. It produces the tables, it produces the graphs, and it also actually explains what you read in the table and what you read in the graph. Now that's very helpful as well. So that's where I want to finish off now with the presentation and open to questions then, I think. Memory?
Yes. Carol, yeah. Yes, Carol, Clive?
Yes?
Yes, you can hear me. Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah, that's where I'll finish.
Okay, thank you very much, Clive. Maybe I'll open it up to questions, but I'll probably start with a question myself, then I'll give others an opportunity. There is a time when you talked about capacity utilization. I want to start there. Because in this country, they also report capacity utilization from an industry point of view. Can you explain that a bit further?
Yes, this methodology does make it possible to split the productivity dollar contribution into a capacity utilization contribution and a efficiency contribution.
Mm-hmm.
So it has got that ability, that function.
Okay. The other question is, when you started, you talked about unions and pay for productivity, linked pay, and the resistance and things like that. How do you link pay to productivity? Hello?
That's a very detailed question, and it's got to start off with having to get the facts for any particular business, and then deciding are there actual contributions coming from productivity that can be shared with all the people that work in the business? Or is all of the profit coming from price over recovery? Without having those facts before you, you can't then discuss. Well, you can discuss like a general ideas, how you might go forward to do profit sharing or something like that in some form or other.
Okay. What would be your advice if the company discovers, like in the example that you just given, that yes, they made money between two periods, they made profit between two periods, but it was all from price over recovery. If you're an HR professional and you're in that particular situation, and it's also likely to be the situation in this country where the profitability has grown by 500%, but volumes have gone down by about 50 to 60%. What would be your advice to someone who is looking at increasing wages?
Yeah, well, that's a difficult one, because you could increase the wages in the short term and sort of share the benefits of the price over recovery to some extent. But it would have to be on the understanding that when the situation changes and selling prices adjust to a lower level, then obviously the so-called surplus profit won't be there to be paid out to anybody, because it just wouldn't exist. I mean, yes, the size of the cake can sort of grow temporarily with price over recovery. If we say that the cake is the total dollar profit, but that's not secure. The only way to secure profit is through productivity efforts. And it would be good business to bank the surplus from price over recovery for a rainy day, or for expansion purposes, because we live in difficult times, as we've experienced with this Wuhan China virus, and which has interrupted normal business activity. And how do you keep that business going in such an environment? What is your fallback?
Okay, thank you very much, Clive. I'll open up for people to ask you questions directly. If there are any questions, please unmute yourself. Yeah, maybe let me, before we go there, there's someone who's shared a question here. They say, how can we measure productivity under remote working conditions?
How can I personally manage it? Is that what they're asking?
No, how to measure productivity.
Well, the management accounts are going to provide the data. I mean, the data is sitting there in the management accounts, in all the financial data that is captured by businesses. All the data is there. All that's going to happen is for it to be correctly extracted, and so that the productivity accounting methodology gets the quantities and the prices and the values associated with those. But you only need any two in any given situation, because dollar value is equal to the output, the quantity times the price. If you've got two of those, you can calculate the third one by default. And if for some reason you don't have a particular value, you can come up with a surrogate value or a proxy value to substitute for it. Okay. So there are these different ways of doing
it. Okay, thank you. Let me open this session before we close to anyone who may have a question directly to Clive. You can either raise your hand.
Yes, Memory.
Yes, Prosper, Kiron. Thank you, Clive, for your presentation. Productivity improvement. The example that you gave of a mining sort of environment, I wanted to bring down to individual functions. For example, in an organization, let me take the example of say IT, a function that does IT management, or a function that does marketing. If you look at marketing, a person is supposed to gets resources from the organization and products for sale. And then on your external components that affect productivity, you listed state of the economy, market, and among the others, particularly state of the economy. Can a marketing person use that as an excuse for failing, for example, to reach their targets? Clive?
Well, I wouldn't like to say it's an excuse. I would like to say it's a reality that there's difficulties out there. And the thing is, has the target, has the key performance indicator been sensitively set? Is it realistic? And that's also the other way in which the productivity accounting can be used. It can be used to test budgets. So a budget can be examined ahead of time through the methodology. And if it reveals that you are expecting a 70% improvement in productivity to achieve a particular outcome, that's ridiculous. It's not possible to get like a 70% improvement in productivity. Very unlikely. So you'd have to revise your budget to make it more sensible from an engineering point of view. And likewise, in a marketing situation, it might reveal that there's an expectation of a massive price over recovery. And in the budget time, people will have to put on proper thinking caps and say, well, look, how realistic is it to expect 100%, 130% increase in selling prices in the future? It's not realistic. It's, you know, yes. I mean, that's how you can examine these things to sort of get some factual basis for going forward with a budget.
Okay. Any other question? Thanks for that. Okay. Okay. Any other question? Clive, the follow-up memory. Carry on. I can carry on. Yes, carry on. Okay, thanks. Clive, the response you gave, I think, applies, for example, to a state of economy that is bad. If for example, an organization in an economy that is fully functional, no problems, no issues like that, can still a salesperson fail to meet their targets based on the state of the economy?
All right, I've got a clear idea of like where you're coming from. No, they can't just have a fallback excuse that it's the external environment that is the total cause of the inability to achieve the target. That's going to be examined more closely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other question? Maybe last question before we end this session, if there's any, anyone with a burning question. Okay, thank you very much, Clive. I think, what time is it in Australia now? 3?
No, it's now 25 past 4.
Oh, in the afternoon. Thank you very much for taking our time to do a presentation to us. I will share the recorded presentation with the participants and also through our website. If you can send me a PDF version of your slides, I will also share with the participants through our portal. Okay. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Yes,
yes, Clive.
Yeah, thank you. I will do the PDF and send that through to you by email. Thanks very much to the audience.
Thank you.
Not that I could see you. Sorry for some of the initial teething troubles, but we got to the end. Thank you for your
Okay.
Bye-bye then.
Okay, thank you to the participant. Thank you very much for attending this session. We hope you will attend our future sessions as we do have 1 or 2 every week, which are free sessions. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day.